Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Back to Africa movements in the United States. How did they start? How did they end? And should Black Americans move back to the motherland? If you're interested, keep watching. There have been four major Back to Africa movements in American history. The first movement was started by a sea captain and entrepreneur named Paul Cuffey. Cuffey wanted to establish a colony in Africa for free African Americans. He used his connection amongst wealthy Black people in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York to raise money and coordinate a voyage for interested immigrants. The plan was to have a ship transport people from the United States to Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone was already home to people who had gained freedom from the British during the Revolutionary War. In 1815, Cuffey successfully brought almost 40 people to Sierra Leone. This would mark the first time that African Americans willingly returned to Africa through a movement led by African Americans. Unfortunately, this time period saw the rise of other non-Black-led organizations with similar goals. The most famous of these organizations was called the American Colonization Society, which was formed in 1817. This organization's members included an unlikely mixture of abolitionists and slavery supporters, who supported returning free Black people to Africa, but for different reasons. Abolitionist members felt that while emancipation was just and necessary action, free Blacks who'd been deprived of education, wealth, and resources for generations would never truly receive support or acceptance in the United States. They believed free people would have a better chance of receiving civil rights if they left the United States and formed their own country. The slavery supporters in the organization feared the growing numbers of free Black people. They believed these people may assist slaves in rebellion or continue to pressure the society to abolish slavery. ACS successfully transported thousands of people to Africa to a place that was eventually called Liberia. Sadly, due to sporadic funding from ACS, poor living conditions, and conflicts with indigenous people, most of those relocated to Liberia died. Those who survived proceeded to create a country with close ties to the United States, where free Black Americans maintained all social, political, and economic power. The oppression of the indigenous population in Liberia would eventually lead to a 14-year civil war. Interest in recolonization stalled when many free Blacks began to oppose the effort. They believed that recolonization was a scheme to separate them from enslaved Blacks and continue slavery. They also considered themselves to be American and did not want to move to a country that they didn't know anything about and felt no connection to. Abolitionists who supported colonization at first changed their perspectives, as they also felt it was only strengthening the slavery system. Most slaveholders declined to support the society since it opposed their economic interests. Paul Cuffey died in September of 1817, taking his Black-led movement and his dream of a Black colony with him. Liberia gained independence as a country in 1847, which formally ended its dependence on ACS. By the time the Civil War started, ACS colonization activities were dead in the water. The organization dissolved in 1964. And I just want to interject here. I'm sorry, I am reading off of a script. I did a lot of research on this. And I'm reading off a script, but my setup, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to have it set up so that I can read it, teleprompter style, if you will. So I'm sorry if it looks like I'm just looking away or whatever. I also didn't purposely plan to dress like I was going to Liberia, okay? Love Liberians, but, I look like I'm about to go on the voyage with Paul Cuffey with this dress on. Anyway, back to the video. The second Back to Africa movement occurred after the Civil War and emancipation. Pan-Africanism, the belief that all the people of the African diaspora have common interests and should be unified, was not a new idea by the time of the early 1900s. Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican Pan-Africanist who had a bold vision for transporting Black people from around the world back to Africa. He created the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, for this purpose, along with a shipping company called Black Star Line. To raise funds for the business expenses, Garvey sold shares in the shipping company to Black people around the country. At the same time, W.E.B. Du Bois, historian, civil rights leader, and also a Pan-Africanist, was advocating for his vision for Black Americans. He agreed with Marcus Garvey that Black people should not accept second-class citizenship and wait for whites to gradually view them as equal, as Booker T. Washington suggested. However, he disagreed with Marcus Garvey about forming a separate Black state. He believed this, too, was giving in to white supremacist actors by simply leaving the country instead of advocating for the rights that we deserved. Du Bois had created an organization called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, which was fighting for Black rights, and he felt a major repatriation movement could threaten these efforts. I should do a video about this versus battle between Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey. Spoiler alert, W.E.B. Du Bois won. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Because Du Bois opposed Marcus Garvey's plan, he became more vocal about his disagreement and suspicions of Garvey's activities. The three first boats of the Garvey fleet disappeared. If the Black Star Zone figures and Mr. Garvey's statements of losses are true, this involves a total disappearance of at least $630,000 of the hard-earned savings of colored folk. Here then is the collapse of the only thing in the Garvey movement which was original or promising. Of course, Mr. Garvey promises repayment, reorganization, and a new Black Star Line. What are his statements and promises worth? W.E.B. Du Bois, The Black Star Line, Crisis, September 1922. Du Bois wasn't the only one taking notice of Garvey's business activities and activism. The infamous J. Edgar Hoover, head of the Bureau of Investigation, which would later become the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, hired the first Black FBI agent to investigate Marcus Garvey. This undercover operation led to a controversial trial and conviction for wire fraud. Garvey was sentenced to a maximum of 5 years and ended up serving 3 after President Calvin Coolidge commuted his sentence. At the time of his conviction, Garvey had created numerous organizations supposedly for the betterment of Black people: the African Communities League, the Black Cross Flying Corps, the Black Cross Nurses. Those were just a few. He had also pledged to start numerous business ventures like hotels and restaurants with the funds he raised. Wait, this sounds familiar.
They are contacting the college to try to force them to cancel my lecture this Thursday to close out Black History Month. They're claiming I smoke crack.
Never mind. As the promises grew, so did his official title. Towards the end of his life, he was known as the Emperor of the Kingdom of Africa, the Grand Sachem of the African Legion, and Knight Commander of the Sublime Order of the Nile. After his release from prison, Garvey left the country. He died in 1940 in London. His organizations never transported a single person to the continent of Africa, and he never stepped foot on the continent himself. Building on the foundations of abolitionists, Pan-Africanists, and socialist scholars of the previous decades, a renewed interest in embracing Black Americans' African heritage came in the 1960s and 70s. All of this coincided with the African Civil Rights Movement and the independence of African nations from colonial powers. This period didn't see a migration movement led by one main leader or an organization or a major exodus of people from America to African countries. Instead, this Back to Africa movement was a cultural one, wherein people created music, fashion, and holidays inspired by an amalgamation of numerous cultures across the continent of Africa. People embraced their natural hair texture. The holiday Kwanzaa was created, and activists continued to fight for political, social, and economic changes for Black people in the United States. This period saw the most popular movements openly embrace various forms of socialism and communism in their activism. The focus wasn't on getting people to leave their respective countries and go to Africa. Instead, the focus was to allow people to embrace their African heritage and identity. Some may not include this in a formal Back to Africa movement, but I still wanted to throw it in there because it was a period of renewed interest in African culture and history. The last and most recent Back to Africa movement is actually occurring right now. To mark the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved person in Virginia, the Ghana Tourism Authority launched the Year of Return in 2019. The goal of the program was to invite the diaspora to visit Ghana and tour the many slave castles, which facilitated an estimated 75% of the transatlantic slave trade. Additionally, the Tourism Authority coordinated numerous cultural events like naming ceremonies, lectures, and musical performances for visitors to enjoy. Experts estimate that the Year of Return generated $1.6 billion in revenue for the country of Ghana. This Year of Return seems like it may be a successful model for other African countries to follow, but I do have some criticisms. One, it's not clear how the money earned from increased tourism and increased investment is being used to help indigenous Ghanaians. A predictable consequence of people bringing Western capital into the country is increased prices for goods and services. People in the diaspora need to think carefully about how they will be contributing to the success of the everyday Ghanaian so they don't inadvertently exploit and displace the local population, i.e. Liberia. Second, I don't think there's anything wrong with a country establishing a tourism industry. However, I must admit that visiting slave trading ports alongside naming and healing ceremonies sounds borderline manipulative. Many Black people need healing from the multi-century trauma of identity theft and exploitation, but I don't know if healing is something that a country's tourism agency can offer. Giving someone a Ghanaian name won't undo the hundreds of years of separation between different ethnic groups. I believe visitors and newcomers alike should approach a move to Ghana the same way they would any other country and be realistic about the adjustments and conflicts that may arrive as they try to integrate into a new culture. Third, Ghana does have a law of abode, which allows a person to stay in the country for 6 months. But after that, what's next? Well, according to the country's website, becoming a citizen requires a person to live in the country for 5 years. This detail wasn't as highly publicized as some of the other year of return events. For the average person, relocating to a different country is a big responsibility. I watched this couple's videos and I think they are very good information about the good and challenging parts of living in Ghana. So definitely check them out. And today, I haven't seen that the government of Ghana is providing specific assistance and funds to the diaspora who seek to move there permanently. Going off script here, guys, I just wanted to bring up a fourth criticism that I saw online that I think is worth mentioning. So we talk a lot about the transatlantic slave trade, which brought people from the continent of Africa to primarily Western countries. Many of these countries today are developed countries where people are getting access to capital that is worth a lot once they move to Ghana. But there was another slave trade called the Trans-Saharan slave trade, which happened before the transatlantic slave trade and lasted much longer. During this slave trade, people were traded from the west coast of Africa into the Middle East and further. And many of these people, their descendants, are still in modern forms of slavery today. They don't have access to the same amount of wealth. Some people are criticizing the fact that the country of Ghana isn't focusing on the Trans-Saharan slave trade in the same way they're focusing on the transatlantic slave trade. And so it makes people feel like that this is just a push for money primarily because the people coming from the West are going to have more capital, more access to capital, whereas some of those people that were traded into slavery and live in the Middle East now are still being subjugated and still living in very bad conditions. So I did want to bring that up because I thought that was a very interesting point that I did not know. Other than that, I really have no problem with people moving to different countries as long as they've done their research and they are willing to try to help the people who are already living there as much as they can. What do you think? Did you know about those previous Back to Africa movements? Why do you think they weren't as successful? And what do you think can be done to make this current year of return more successful for the people going and the people who are going to be receiving these new visitors? Do you plan to move to an African country? Comment it all below. I can't wait to see you guys again in the next video. Goodbye. Because why do I want to call him Dubois? Why do I keep wanting to say that? It's like I want to pronounce it in the French way. Ugh.